we were going to do a shit or hit study on salt loading today, and I went through a lot of a lot of searching through different studies and on the so-called salt loading that people do leading into a race. And I'm putting out the call to anyone out there who's got anything decent that is showing either way, a performance advantage or a performance detriment to salt loading, because it was very hard to find anything that I would consider even slightly useful. And yet I'm so surprised how many companies recommend this salt loading process. For me, I'm not a big fan of it. Every person who's tapering, if you're salting your foods throughout the week, you're backing off your training. I feel like people tend to get their electrolyte stores up to scratch, especially if they're doing, the magnesium and calcium sups that you should probably be doing if you're sweating a lot anyway. And, the beautiful part about sea salt, or what we salt our foods with, is the chloride component. And it's what we can taste when we eat salt. And our body will tell us if we need it or if we don't need it. And the problem with salt loading with sports nutrition products, sports electrolytes, is they normally use sodium citrate, which, while it is a little bit less acidic on the gut, so it's not a bad option during the race, you can't use that chloride component to determine how much you should be taking in at rest. And you can just guzzle it down in the days leading up. Without realizing it, your body's going, shit, we've got so much sodium in the system. You're overloaded, you start urinating, you might feel nauseous, but typically you'll just start going to the toilet a lot. And the body starts to get rid of all that excess salt. While it's getting rid of that salt, it's also getting rid of precious bodily fluid. And, one thing we're trying to do is get maximum hydration going into the race. And what actually happens is people end up dehydrating themselves. They've got a headache, they're going to the toilet nonstop. And I've seen it over and over again with people who do this preloading of sodium. So please, from what all my experience is, please just salt your food, drink water. Don't carry around a bottle with you and use it as a nervous tick, just guzzling water, because obviously just drinking too much water in itself can also flush your electrolytes, which can end up with the same problems. Just do what you normally do day to day. Your body's very good at regulating. Salt your food, drink water, and I think save the tasty, sweet electrolytes for during sessions when, you're definitely going to need it because you're definitely sweating. There's also the aspect of really overloading on potassium, which is, helps with the contraction of muscles. But you often find people who've been hyper loading on electrolytes is they'll jump into the swim warm up and they're like, I've never had this before, but I'm cramping in my feet, in my calves. And I get that even when I just drink a coconut water, which is, the ratio of potassium to sodium is actually sort of the opposite of what it should be. So just as a hot tip, if you're going to use coconut water to hydrate, you should actually put another pinch of salt into it to balance out the potassium. But I find, people that have really loaded on potassium, they can be actually really twitchy, the same way as if they haven't had enough potassium, where they, having too much and having too little of electrolytes can cause the same problems. So I think the sweat testing can be really important. I think especially in Ironman racing and obviously for Kona, the range that people can be is quite a lot. Obviously, you can change how much salt you lose to a degree with heat adaptation, but a heavy sodium loser is still going to lose a fair bit of sodium compared to someone who doesn't lose that same amount. It's very genetic. So not promising anything, but we're hoping that in the next few months, RPG will have a proper machine to do some sweat testing analysis. It's a big investment, so I'm still just sort of arming and ahhing. I'm not a fan of the sweat patch system that is going around, where you basically sweat and then send it off. Send off a, I don't know what they call it. The little, you basically jar the what's the word?
Sweat patch.
Yeah, that'll do. That little bit, yeah. I feel like if you, I've just seen some pretty not inaccurate, but inconsistent results. So, the same person will send off and get a wide-ranging result. So, just as you said, Steve, just don't do anything silly the day before. you've trained perfectly well just doing normal things, and the body will tell you when you're thirsty, and it'll tell you when you're craving salt. So
Yeah, but it
listen to your
just
body.
sucks that everyone has to learn the hard way to actually learn. Like, we have to sacrifice a race to not make that mistake again. Like athletes recently under us, Reedy, we talked about it, how they were cramping in the swim, felt really horrible and sluggish, and had no power on the bike immediately as well. And the cramps didn't stop. And it would, we established that, he drank way too much the day before the race. And that's common. Wasn't just him. That's just everyone has to make this mistake. Instead of being told, don't do this. Well, some people can just do it, but from Reedy's experience with me, I have to do it myself. And
I was exactly the same. I was exactly the same, Steve. Unfortunately, there's just some people out there like you and I who don't listen or believe what we hear until we have to go through the embarrassment of walking it in at the end of a race. So, but everyone listening, you've been warned. Don't be an idiot.